The icy winds of Colorado swept through Timber Creek like the whispers of ghosts, rattling the wooden boards of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Pearl Winters huddled against the harsh January night of 1875, her thin shawl offering little protection as she slept curled into a tight ball on the saloon's porch. The frost had painted delicate patterns on her eyelashes, and her breath formed small clouds that disappeared into the darkness. At 22, Pearl had nowhere else to go, having spent her last penny on a stagecoach ride that had left her stranded in this mining town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a locket containing the only image of her late parents. Inside the saloon, the raucous laughter and tinkling piano keys created a stark contrast to the silent, frigid world outside. Isaac Montgomery pushed through the batwing doors, his spurs jingling with each confident step. At 30 years old, he'd carved out a respectable name for himself as both a rancher and one of the few men in these parts who could be trusted to keep his word. The night was winding down, and Isaac had just finished a successful poker game, his pockets heavier than when he'd arrived. He pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders, preparing to face the biting cold for the ride back to his ranch. That was when he spotted her, a woman, barely more than a girl, curled up like a wounded animal on the wooden slats of the porch. "Good Lord," he muttered, approaching cautiously. He knelt beside her, noticing the bluish tint to her lips and the way her body trembled uncontrollably. Without hesitation, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Miss, can you hear me?" Pearl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and clouded with exhaustion. She tried to scramble away, but her limbs were stiff with cold. "Easy now," Isaac said, his voice deep but gentle. "You'll freeze to death out here. Leave me be," Pearl managed through chattering teeth. I'm not that kind of woman." Isaac's expression softened. "I'm not suggesting anything improper, miss. But no one should be out in this cold. She's coming home with me," he announced firmly, looking over his shoulder at the bartender who had stepped out to investigate. "You taking in another stray, Montgomery?" the bartender called with a knowing grin. "Better than leaving her to die on your doorstep, Thompson," Isaac replied. He turned back to Pearl. "My ranch is warm, and my housekeeper will be there. You'll be safe. I give you my word as a gentleman." Pearl studied his face in the dim light spilling from the saloon windows. His eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat, and despite her caution, she sensed no danger from him, only genuine concern. "I don't have a choice, do I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Everyone has a choice," Isaac replied. "But some choices are better than others, and right now, coming with me is your best one." With great effort, Pearl nodded her consent. Isaac removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before helping her to her feet. She swayed dangerously, and without warning, her knees buckled beneath her. Isaac caught her with ease, scooping her into his arms. "I've got you," he murmured, surprised at how little she weighed. "My horse is just around the corner." Pearl wanted to protest, to maintain some dignity, but the warmth of his chest against her cheek and the solid strength of his arms around her were too comforting to resist. She allowed her head to rest against him as he carried her to his horse. The massive chestnut stallion snorted and stamped its hooves as they approached. Isaac spoke soothingly to the animal while somehow managing to mount without letting go of Pearl. He settled her in front of him, keeping one arm securely around her waist. "Hold tight to the saddle horn," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. "It's about 5 miles to my place. Can you stay awake that long?" "Yes," Pearl lied, already feeling herself drifting off in the cocoon of warmth his body provided. Isaac chuckled softly. "I'll keep you upright. Rest if you need to." They rode through the night, the powerful horse carrying them swiftly across the snow-covered landscape. Pearl faded in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the steady beat of Isaac's heart against her back and his occasional quiet reassurances. When they finally arrived at the ranch, lights glowed warmly from the windows of a substantial 2-story house. A woman's silhouette appeared at the door before they had even reached the porch. "Isaac Montgomery. What on earth?" The middle-aged woman hurried down the steps, wrapping a shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Mrs. Abernathy, we need to get her warm," Isaac explained as he dismounted, carefully pulling Pearl down with him. "Found her sleeping on the porch of the Silver Dollar. Merciful heavens. Mrs. Abernathy exclaimed, immediately taking charge. Bring her in. I'll heat water for a bath. Inside, the house was blessedly warm from a roaring fire in the stone hearth. Isaac carried Pearl to a chair near the flames, while Mrs. Abernathy bustled about, gathering blankets and barking orders at a young ranch hand who had appeared to see what the commotion was about. Billy, take care of Mr. Montgomery's horse, and bring him more firewood while you're at it. Yes, madam, the boy replied, disappearing into the night. Pearl was more aware now, the warmth of the fire bringing feeling back to her extremities in painful waves. She looked around at the comfortable, if modest, furnishings of the ranch house. It was clean and well kept, with a few touches that spoke of a female-influenced curtains at the windows, a vase of dried flowers on the mantel. What's your name, dear? Mrs. Abernathy asked, kneeling before Pearl and rubbing her hands to restore circulation. Pearl Winters, she managed, her voice stronger than before. Well, Miss Winters, let's get you into a hot bath and some dry clothes. Then some broth, I think. Isaac, who had been hovering nearby, nodded in agreement. I'll be in my study if you need anything, Mrs. Abernathy. Make sure Miss Winters has everything she requires. Of course, sir, the housekeeper replied. Come along now, Miss Winters. Can you walk, or shall I have Mr. Montgomery carry you upstairs? Pearl's cheeks flushed at the thought. I can walk, she insisted, struggling to her feet. Her legs still felt weak, but her pride demanded she stand on her own. Isaac watched her with a mixture of concern and admiration. I'll check on you in the morning, Miss Winters. Rest well. Pearl met his gaze directly for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I don't know how to repay your kindness. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. No repayment necessary. Just get warm and rest. As Mrs. Abernathy led her upstairs, Pearl glanced back over her shoulder at the tall figure of the man who had saved her life. He stood with his back to the fire, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor, and for the first time in months, Pearl felt something akin to hope flutter in her chest. The bath was heaven, a large copper tub filled with steaming water, scented with lavender. Mrs. Abernathy had discreetly left Pearl alone after helping her undress, shocked but tactfully silent about the fading bruises that marked Pearl's back and arms. There's a nightgown on the chair there, and I've laid out some of my daughter's old clothes for tomorrow, the housekeeper had said. She's married now, living in Denver. Won't miss them a bit. After soaking until the water cooled, Pearl dried herself and slipped into the soft cotton nightgown. It was slightly large but infinitely better than the dirty, worn dress she'd been wearing for weeks. The bedroom Mrs. Abernathy had prepared was small but comfortable, with a feather bed that seemed like unimaginable luxury after sleeping rough for so long. Pearl sipped the hot beef broth the housekeeper had brought up, savoring each spoonful as if it might be her last. When Mrs. Abernathy returned to collect the empty bowl, Pearl caught her hand. Why is he doing this? She asked. Taking in a stranger? The older woman's face softened. Mr. Montgomery has a good heart. Lost his parents young, knows what it's like to be alone in the world. Now get some sleep, child. You're safe here. Pearl wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion claimed her. She was asleep before Mrs. Abernathy had closed the door behind her. Downstairs, Isaac sat at his desk, ledger open before him, but his mind elsewhere. He'd seen too many people, especially women, broken by the harsh realities of frontier life. Something about Pearl Winters had stirred a protective instinct in him that went beyond simple Christian charity. She's settled, then? He asked when Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway. Sleeping like the dead, poor thing. The housekeeper hesitated. Mr. Montgomery, she's been badly treated. There are bruises. Isaac's jaw tightened. Recent, some old, some newer. She's been running from something or someone. Or towards something, Isaac suggested. Either way, she's welcome here until she decides what's next. Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. You're a good man, Isaac Montgomery. Just doing what my father would have done, he replied, turning back to his ledger. Get some rest, Mrs. Abernathy. I have a feeling tomorrow will be an interesting day. Pearl woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, panic seized her as she tried to remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, the bitter cold, the strong arms that had carried her, the kindness of strangers. She sat up slowly, her body still aching from days of hard travel and exposure. The borrowed clothes lay neatly folded on a chair by the window, a simple blue calico dress, undergarments, and even a pair of slightly worn boots that looked to be close to her size. After dressing, Pearl stood before a small mirror hanging on the wall. The face that looked back at her was thinner than she remembered, with shadows under the eyes that spoke of hardship. She smoothed her long auburn hair as best she could without a proper brush, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she ventured downstairs, the smell of coffee and bacon guided her to the kitchen where Mrs. Abernathy was busy at the stove. "Good morning, Miss Winters. How are you feeling today?" the housekeeper asked cheerfully. "Much better, thank you," Pearl replied, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Is there something I can do to help?" Mrs. Abernathy smiled warmly. "You can sit yourself down at that table and eat a proper breakfast. You're thin as a rail, child." Pearl obeyed, though it felt strange to be waited on after fending for herself for so long. A plate heaped with eggs, bacon, and biscuits was placed before her, along with a steaming cup of coffee. Mr. Montgomery usually takes breakfast in the dining room, but he was out at first light checking on a sick calf, Mrs. Abernathy explained. "He asked that you make yourself at home and said he'd be back mid-morning to speak with you." Pearl nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. Of course there would be questions. No one did something for nothing in this world. She'd learned that lesson all too well. "Mrs. Abernathy," she began cautiously, "what sort of man is Mr. Montgomery? Truly." The housekeeper paused in her work, considering the question. "He's fair. Expects honest work from his hands, but treats them well. Keeps to himself mostly, though he's respected in town. His father built this ranch from nothing, and Isaac has nearly doubled its size since taking over 5 years ago after his parents passed." "He's not married?" Pearl asked, then blushed at her boldness. Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "No, though not for lack of young ladies trying to catch his eye. He says he hasn't found the right woman yet." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Now eat up before it gets cold." Pearl needed no further encouragement. She ate every bite on her plate, unaware of how famished she'd been until food was before her. As she was finishing her coffee, the sound of boots on the porch announced Isaac's return. He entered the kitchen bringing with him the crisp scent of winter air and leather. His cheeks were ruddy from the cold, and he removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Miss Winters," he greeted her with a nod. "I'm pleased to see you looking better this morning." Pearl stood quickly, nearly knocking over her chair in her haste. "Mr. Montgomery, I can't thank you enough for your kindness last night." "No need for thanks. Mrs. Abernathy been taking good care of you." "She has, sir. The bath and bed were. They were a blessing." Isaac smiled, the expression transforming his solemn face. "Good. When you're finished with breakfast, perhaps you'd join me in the parlor? We should talk about your situation." Pearl nodded, her nervousness returning. "Of course." The parlor was a comfortable room with a small sofa, 2 armchairs, and bookshelves lining one wall. Isaac gestured for Pearl to take a seat on the sofa while he remained standing, looking somewhat uncomfortable with the formal setting. "Miss Winters, I don't mean to pry into your personal affairs, but I need to know if you're in some kind of trouble. Is someone looking for you?" Pearl twisted her hands in her lap. "No, sir. No one is looking for me." "You're certain?" Mrs. Abernathy mentioned. "Injuries." Pearl's face flushed with shame. "That's in the past. I left Chicago 3 months ago after the man I worked for tried to force himself on me. I fought back, and he beat me badly. I took what money I could find in his desk and ran." Isaac's expression darkened. "This man, he was your employer?" "Yes. I was a housekeeper for him and his invalid wife. After she died, Pearl swallowed hard. "Well, his attentions turned elsewhere. I'd been saving to move west anyway. My parents died of fever 5 years ago, and there was nothing keeping me there. So you came to Colorado." "I meant to go all the way to California," Pearl admitted. "But the stagecoach fare kept rising, and my money ran out in Timber Creek. I've been looking for work, but no one would hire a young woman with no references and nowhere to stay." Isaac finished for her. Pearl nodded miserably. "I tried to sleep in the livery stable last night, but the stable master found me and chased me out. The saloon porch was the only place I could find shelter from the wind." Isaac paced the length of the room, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, He turned to face her directly. "Miss Winters, I have a proposition for you." Mrs. Abernathy has been complaining for months that she needs help with the house, especially now that we've expanded the ranch. I could offer you employment as her assistant room, board, and fair wages. Pearl stared at him in disbelief. "You would hire me? Just like that? You don't know anything about me. I know you survived on your own for 3 months in a harsh land. That tells me you're resourceful and determined. I know you're honest enough to tell me the truth about your past. And I know Mrs. Abernathy is a fine judge of character, and she likes you." He smiled slightly. "That's enough for me to give you a chance." "I don't know what to say," Pearl whispered, tears threatening. "Say yes, at least until you decide what you want to do next." Pearl took a deep breath. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I promise I won't disappoint you." "Isaac," he said, "if you're to live and work here, you might as well use my given name." "Isaac," Pearl repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "And I'm Pearl." He extended his hand, and she took it hesitantly. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but gentle. "Welcome to Montgomery Ranch, Pearl Winters." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Pearl settled into life at the ranch. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a patient teacher, showing Pearl the routines of the household and gradually entrusting her with more responsibilities. Pearl threw herself into the work, grateful for the safe haven she'd found and determined to prove herself worthy of the chance she'd been given. Isaac was often away from the house during daylight hours, overseeing the ranch operations or writing the boundaries of his property. When their paths did cross, usually at dinner, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain reserve. Pearl found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, intrigued by the quiet strength he exuded and the respect he commanded from his ranch hands. February brought milder weather, and Pearl began to venture outside more, exploring the immediate surroundings of the ranch house. On one such afternoon, she was hanging laundry on the line when she heard a commotion from the direction of the barn. "Get Doc Miller," someone shouted. "The boss is hurt." Pearl dropped the wet sheet she was holding and ran toward the barn, her heart pounding. Inside, several ranch hands were gathered around Isaac, who sat on a hay bale, his face pale beneath his tan, right arm cradled against his chest. "What happened?" Pearl demanded, pushing through the men. "Bull got ornery during branding," one of the hands explained. "Caught the boss with its horn. Shoulders dislocated, I reckon." Isaac looked up, his jaw tight with pain. "It's not as bad as it looks. Billy's gone for the doctor." Pearl knelt beside him, assessing the injury with a practiced eye. "The doctor could be hours. Your shoulder needs to be set now before the muscle seize up completely." The men exchanged dubious glances. "You know how to do that?" Isaac asked, studying her face. "My father was a doctor," Pearl explained. "I assisted him often before he died. I've seen this done many times." Isaac considered for a moment, then nodded. "Do it. I need 2 strong men to help," Pearl instructed, slipping naturally into the role of authority. "And a flask of whiskey, if anyone has one." A flask appeared, and Isaac took a long swallow before handing it back. Pearl positioned the 2 largest ranch hands, one to hold Isaac steady, the other to follow her specific directions. "This will hurt," she warned Isaac, meeting his eyes directly. His mouth quirked in a pained smile. "I trust you." The simple statement sent an unexpected warmth through Pearl's chest. She focused on the task, giving clear, confident instructions to the ranch hand who would help her maneuver the joint back into place. Isaac didn't make a sound during the procedure, though sweat beaded on his forehead, and his good hand gripped the hay bale with white knuckles. When the shoulder slid back into its socket with an audible pop, Isaac exhaled sharply, the tension visibly draining from his body. "Better?" Pearl asked, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. "Much," he confirmed, flexing his fingers cautiously. "Where did a Chicago housekeeper learn to do that?" "I told you, my father was a doctor," Pearl replied, suddenly self-conscious under the admiring gazes of the ranch hands. "He wanted a son to follow in his footsteps, but got me instead. He taught me anyway, said knowledge never goes to waste." "He was right," Isaac said. "Thank you, Pearl." When Dr. Miller finally arrived an hour later, he examined Isaac's shoulder and fashioned a sling, looking impressed when told of Pearl's intervention. "Couldn't have done better myself," the doctor admitted. "You should take it easy for a few days, Montgomery. No writing, no heavy lifting. Isaac frowned at this prescription. I've got a ranch to run. And capable men to help you, Dr. Miller countered. Don't undo the good work Miss Winters has done. That evening, Pearl brought a tray to Isaac's study, where he was attempting to update his ledgers one-handed. He looked up at her entrance, his expression softening. Mrs. Abernathy said you haven't eaten since breakfast, Pearl explained, setting the tray on a clear corner of the desk. She's retired for the night, so I thought I'd bring you something. Thank you. Isaac set down his pen with a sigh. Not making much progress anyway. Pearl glanced at the open ledger. Would you like some help? My father made sure I learned figures as well as medicine. Isaac raised an eyebrow. You're full of surprises, Pearl Winters. Is that a yes? He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Please. It would be a great help. For the next hour, Pearl took dictation as Isaac outlined transactions and expenses that needed recording. The work was straightforward, and Pearl's neat handwriting filled page after page. When they finished, Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying her with newfound respect. You're wasted as a housekeeper, he observed. With your skills, you could do much more. Pearl shrugged, closing the ledger. Perhaps, but after what happened in Chicago, I've learned to be cautious about which doors I walk through. A wise policy, Isaac agreed. But not all men are like your former employer. No, Pearl said softly. Some are like you. Their eyes met across the desk, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Isaac cleared his throat and looked away first. It's late. You should get some rest. Pearl stood, gathering the empty dishes onto the tray. Good night, Isaac. Pearl, he called as she reached the door. When she turned, he added simply, I'm glad you're here. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. So am I. As March rolled in, bringing with it the first tentative signs of spring, Pearl found herself increasingly comfortable at Montgomery Ranch. Mrs. Abernathy had taken to calling her my girl and treated her with motherly affection. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully when they saw her, having heard about how she tended to the boss's injury. And Isaac had begun to seek out her company in small ways. He asked her opinion on books from his library, invited her to join him for evening walks around the property, and sometimes just sat with her on the porch as twilight settled over the land. Pearl tried not to read too much into these gestures. Isaac was a kind man, and she was an employee in his household. The flutter in her chest when he smiled at her was inappropriate and foolish, a lesson she'd thought she'd learned in Chicago. And yet, she couldn't help the way her heart quickened when he entered a room, or how she found herself making excuses to cross his path during the day. One afternoon, as Pearl was dusting the bookshelves in the parlor, Isaac appeared in the doorway, dressed in his best clothes. I'm riding into town for supplies, he announced. Would you like to come along? Mrs. Abernathy has a list of things she needs for the kitchen. Pearl hesitated. She hadn't left the ranch since her arrival and wasn't sure how she felt about facing the townspeople who had previously ignored her pleas for work. You can't hide out here forever, Isaac said gently, seeming to read her thoughts. Besides, you've earned a new dress or two. Consider it part of your wages. I shouldn't, you should, he insisted. Mrs. Abernathy agrees with me. She's already laid out her riding skirt for you to borrow. An hour later, they were riding toward Timber Creek, Pearl on a gentle mare named Daisy, Isaac on his chestnut stallion. The day was clear and mild, the mountains in the distance still capped with snow, but the valley beginning to green. It's beautiful, Pearl said, taking in the vastness of the landscape. So different from Chicago. Do you miss the city? Isaac asked. Pearl considered the question. I miss certain things, libraries, theaters, the bustle of people. But there's a freedom here that I never felt there. The West isn't always kind to those seeking freedom, Isaac observed. Especially women on their own. No, Pearl agreed. But it offers second chances to those willing to work for them. Isaac nodded, a look of approval in his eyes. That it does. Timber Creek was a small but growing settlement with a main street lined with businesses: the general store, blacksmith, bank, a couple of saloons, and a modest hotel. People nodded respectfully to Isaac as they rode past, curious glances directed at Pearl. Their first stop was the general store, where Isaac introduced Pearl to the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, as Miss Winters, who's been helping Mrs. Abernathy manage the household. Pleasure to meet you properly, Miss Winters, Jenkins said, shaking her hand. Heard about how you fixed up Mr. Montgomery's shoulder. Quite the healer, they say. Pearl blushed at the unexpected recognition. It was nothing special, Mr. Jenkins. Saved me weeks of discomfort, Isaac countered. Now, Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Abernathy sent a list, and Miss Winters needs some fabric for new dresses. While Isaac discussed ranch supplies with Jenkins, Pearl explored the fabric section, running her fingers over calicos and muslins with delight. It had been so long since she'd had new clothes. Eventually, she selected a practical blue calico for everyday wear and, after much deliberation, a lovely green cotton with a small floral pattern that brought out the color of her eyes. An excellent choice, came a female voice from behind her. Pearl turned to find a well-dressed woman about her own age studying her with interest. I'm Pamela Wilson. My father owns the bank. Pearl Winters, Pearl replied, somewhat warily. Yes, I know. You're staying at the Montgomery Ranch. Pamela's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. How fortunate for you that Isaac found you when he did. There was something in her tone that made Pearl uncomfortable. Yes, Mr. Montgomery has been very kind. Oh, it's Mr. Montgomery, is it? Pamela arched a perfectly shaped eyebrow. You should know that Isaac is considered quite a catch in these parts. Several of us have had our eyes on him for years. Pearl felt her face grow hot. I work for Mr. Montgomery. That's all. Of course, Pamela said smoothly. I just thought you should understand the social dynamics of our little community. Isaac deserves a wife who can help him advance his standing, someone with connections and breeding. I'm sure Mr. Montgomery will make his own decisions about what he deserves, Pearl replied, struggling to keep her voice even. If you'll excuse me. She moved away, clutching her fabric selections to her chest, heart pounding uncomfortably. Of course, there would be women interested in Isaac, women far more suitable than a penniless drifter with a questionable past. Are you all right? Isaac asked when she rejoined him at the counter. You look upset. I'm fine, Pearl lied. Just a bit overwhelmed. It's been a while since I've been in town. Isaac didn't look convinced, but didn't press the issue. After paying for their purchases, he suggested lunch at the hotel restaurant. But Pearl, still rattled by her encounter with Pamela, asked if they could return to the ranch instead. Of course, Isaac agreed, helping her mount Daisy. But first, there's someone I'd like you to meet. He led her to a small house at the edge of town with a sign identifying it as the office of J. W. Miller, M.D. The doctor who had checked Isaac's shoulder greeted them warmly, inviting them into his cluttered examination room. Miss Winters, I've been hoping to speak with you again, Dr. Miller said. Isaac tells me you have considerable medical knowledge from your father. Pearl shot a questioning look at Isaac, who shrugged. I might have mentioned your skills to the doc here. The truth is, Miss Winters, I'm not getting any younger, Dr. Miller continued. And this town is growing faster than I can keep up with. I could use an assistant, someone to help with patients, mix medicines, perhaps even make house calls to the less serious cases. Pearl stared at him in shock. You're offering me a position? As a medical assistant? If you're interested, the doctor confirmed. It wouldn't be full-time at first, maybe 2 or 3 days a week. But it would be real medical work, putting those skills of yours to good use. I don't know what to say, Pearl stammered, overwhelmed by the unexpected opportunity. Say you'll think about it, Dr. Miller suggested. Talk it over with Isaac. If you decide you're interested, come see me next week, and we'll discuss details. On the ride back to the ranch, Pearl was uncharacteristically quiet, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. A chance to use her medical knowledge, to help people as her father had it, was more than she'd dared hope for. And yet, you don't seem as pleased as I expected, Isaac observed as they passed the halfway point to the ranch. It's a wonderful opportunity, Pearl said carefully. I'm grateful to you for speaking to Dr. Miller. But, Pearl sighed, but I'm confused. You hired me to help Mrs. Abernathy. Now you're helping me find other work. Isaac was silent for a long moment. When I found you on that porch, Pearl, you needed shelter and safety. Now you've had time to heal, to find your footing. You deserve the chance to build the life you want, not just the one circumstance forced on you. And if the life I want is at Montgomery Ranch. The words slipped out before Pearl could stop them. Isaac reined his horse to a stop, turning in the saddle to look at her directly. Is it? Pearl couldn't meet his gaze. I don't know. I'm confused about many things. Did something happen in town? Isaac pressed. You've been different since the general store. Pearl hesitated, then decided on honesty. I met Pamela Wilson. She made it clear that I should understand my place as your employee, nothing more. Isaac's expression darkened. Pamela Wilson has no say in who I employ or anything else in my life. She seems to think she does, Pearl replied softly. She mentioned connections and breeding and what you deserve in a wife. Did she now? Isaac's voice had a dangerous edge to it. And did she happen to mention that I've turned down her father's not-so-subtle hints about courting her for the past 3 years? Pearl's eyes widened. No, she left that part out. Pamela Wilson wants Montgomery Ranch more than she wants me, Isaac said bluntly. Her father's been trying to expand his holdings, and my land would be a fine addition to his investments. Oh, Pearl didn't know what else to say. Isaac urged his horse forward again, and they rode in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. Pearl, I want you to take the position with Dr. Miller if it's what you want. But I also want you to know that your place at the ranch is secure, regardless. These aren't mutually exclusive options. Thank you, Pearl said, genuinely touched by his support. I'll think about it. They were almost home when Isaac added quietly. And for what it's worth, I believe a person's worth is measured by their character, not their background or connections. My father taught me that. Pearl smiled, a weight lifting from her heart. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Isaac agreed. I think he would have liked you very much. As they approached the ranch, the golden afternoon light bathed the buildings in a warm glow, and Pearl was struck by how much this place had come to feel like home in such a short time. Whether she took the position with Dr. Miller or not, she knew now that she didn't have to choose between her ambitions and the safety she'd found here. And perhaps, just perhaps, there might be room for something more to grow between her and the quiet rancher who continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness. April brought gentle rains and explosions of wildflowers across the ranch land. Pearl had accepted Dr. Miller's offer and now spent Tuesdays and Thursdays in town, learning to combine her father's teachings with the doctor's practical frontier medicine. The arrangement worked well. Mrs. Abernathy managed the household on those days, and Pearl threw herself into her medical duties with enthusiasm. Isaac had made it his habit to ride into town to escort Pearl home on her working days, claiming it wasn't safe for a woman to travel alone, though the road between the ranch and Timber Creek was well-traveled and generally secure. Pearl suspected he simply enjoyed their rides together as much as she did a precious time when they could talk freely, away from the watchful eyes of the ranch hands and Mrs. Abernathy. Their conversations during these rides ranged widely from books they'd both read to Isaac's plans for expanding the ranch's cattle operation to Pearl's growing confidence in her medical skills. There was an ease between them now, a comfortable friendship that sometimes hinted at deeper feelings neither was quite ready to acknowledge. On one such afternoon in late April, they were halfway back to the ranch when dark clouds began gathering ominously in the west. We should pick up the pace, Isaac suggested, eyeing the sky. That storm's moving fast. They urged their horses into a trot, but the weather moved faster. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. There's a line shack about a quarter-mile off the road, Isaac shouted over the increasing wind. We'd better wait it out there. Pearl nodded, already soaked to the skin despite her rain slicker. They turned off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound through a stand of pines. The line shack, a simple one-room structure used by ranch hands when working distant parts of the property, appeared through the curtain of rain. Isaac dismounted quickly and helped Pearl down before leading both horses to a small lean-to attached to the shack. Inside, the cabin was basic but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. You're shivering, Isaac observed as he quickly built a fire with the dry wood stacked beside the hearth. I'm all right, Pearl insisted, though her teeth were chattering. The spring rain had brought a chill with it, and her wet clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin. Once the fire was crackling, Isaac rummaged through a trunk and produced a wool blanket and a flannel shirt. Here, you need to get out of those wet things. I'll check on the horses while you change. Pearl hesitated, but practicality won out over modesty. As soon as Isaac had closed the door behind him, She peeled off her sodden dress and petticoats, hanging them on pegs near the fire to dry. The flannel shirt Isaac had given her was comically large, but wonderfully warm, falling almost to her knees. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and was sitting on the edge of the cot when Isaac returned, equally drenched. "Storm's settling in," he reported, removing his hat and shaking water from it. "Might be here a while." Pearl tried not to stare as he shrugged out of his wet coat and vest. "There are more dry clothes in the trunk," she suggested, pointing. Isaac nodded gratefully and retrieved another shirt. With his back turned to her, he quickly changed, and Pearl found herself averting her eyes from the brief glimpse of his bare torso, muscled from years of ranch work. "Hungry?" he asked, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "There should be some jerky and beans in the cupboard." They made a simple meal, heating beans over the fire and sharing a canteen of water. The storm raged outside, rain pounding on the roof and wind howling around the corners of the shack. Inside, however, it was surprisingly cozy, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Mrs. Abernathy will be worried," Pearl said as they finished eating. "She knows I'd find shelter if caught in a storm," Isaac assured her. "We've weathered worse than this." Pearl pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, suddenly very aware of how alone they were. It wasn't improper, not really. The situation was beyond their control, and Isaac had behaved as a perfect gentleman. Still, she couldn't help but imagine what people in town would say if they knew she'd spent hours alone in a remote cabin with the eligible rancher. "What's troubling you?" Isaac asked, his voice gentle. Pearl sighed. "I was thinking about my reputation, about your reputation. If people knew we were here." "People will always talk," Isaac said with a shrug. "What matters is that we know the truth of things." "Is it that simple for you?" "Not always," he admitted. "But I learned long ago not to let others' opinions dictate my actions. My father used to say, 'Live so that you can face yourself in the mirror each morning without shame.'" Pearl smiled at that. "Your father does sound wise. I wish I could have met him." "So do I," Isaac said softly. After a moment, he added, "Tell me about your parents. You rarely speak of them." Pearl stared into the fire, memories both sweet and painful surfacing. "My father was devoted to medicine. He worked in the poorest areas of Chicago, often taking payment in chickens or vegetables when people couldn't afford his fees. My mother was his perfect complement, practical where he was idealistic, firm where he was gentle." "They sound like good people." They were. When the fever took them, it was so quick. 3 days from first symptoms to... Pearl swallowed hard. "I was 17. There was a small inheritance, enough to keep me until I found work with the Harises, the family I mentioned before. And no other family." Pearl shook her head. "No one. My father was an only child, and my mother's family disowned her when she married him. They considered medicine an unsuitable profession. Too much contact with the lower classes." Isaac made a disgusted sound. "Their loss. What about your family?" Pearl asked, eager to shift the focus from her painful memories. "You've mentioned your father, but not your mother." A fond smile crossed Isaac's face. "My mother was extraordinary. She came west as a bride of 18, leaving behind a comfortable life in Boston. My father had nothing but a land claim and big dreams. She learned to shoot, to garden in rocky soil, to birth calves, to fight off claim jumpers, all while raising me and maintaining a sense of civilization in the wilderness." "She sounds remarkable," Pearl said, moved by the obvious love and respect in his voice. "She was. When my parents died a wagon accident 5 years ago, I thought I'd never recover from the loss. But eventually I realized that the best way to honor them was to build on what they'd started, to make this ranch everything they dreamed it could be." They fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the storm and the crackling of the fire. Pearl found herself studying Isaac's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the firelight caught in his dark hair. Something had shifted between them in this small, isolated space, a deeper understanding, perhaps, or a willingness to reveal more of themselves to each other. "Your clothes should be nearly dry," Isaac said eventually, breaking the spell. "The rain's letting up. We should be able to head back soon." Pearl nodded, suddenly reluctant to leave this moment behind. "Isaac." He looked at her questioningly. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." Isaac held her gaze for a long moment. something unspoken passing between them. "You're welcome, Pearl." By the time they returned to the ranch, the storm had passed entirely, leaving behind a freshly washed world and a spectacular sunset. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over them both, insisting they change into dry clothes and sit down to hot soup and biscuits immediately. If the housekeeper had any thoughts about their delayed return, she kept them to herself, though Pearl caught her watching them with a thoughtful expression throughout the evening. That night, lying in her bed, Pearl replayed the hours in the lined shack in her mind. Nothing improper had happened, nothing at all, really, and yet everything felt different now. She'd seen a side of Isaac beyond the capable rancher and kind employer. She'd glimpsed the man beneath the responsibilities, a man who carried the legacy of his parents with quiet dignity, who valued character above social standing, who looked at her sometimes as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. And Pearl had to admit, at least to herself in the darkness of her room, that she was falling in love with him. May brought warmer weather and increased activity on the ranch as calving season reached its peak. Pearl found herself busier than ever, dividing her time between her duties at the ranch, her work with Dr. Miller, and occasionally assisting with birthing calves when her medical skills were needed. Isaac seemed to be everywhere at once, directing ranch hands, inspecting fences, negotiating cattle sales, and still finding time to join Pearl for dinner each evening and occasional walks when their schedules aligned. There was a new awareness between them, an undercurrent of tension that was not unpleasant but remained unacknowledged. One Saturday morning, Pearl was helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare for the annual spring dance in town, a tradition that brought together ranchers, townspeople, and even some of the more sociable miners from the surrounding hills for an evening of music and community. "You'll need a proper dress," Mrs. Abernathy declared as they kneaded bread dough side by side. "Something special, not just your everyday calico." "I'm not sure I should go," Pearl said hesitantly. "I don't really know many people yet." Mrs. Abernathy snorted. "Nonsense. Everyone knows you now, Dr. Miller's promising assistant, the girl who fixed Isaac Montgomery's shoulder. Besides, Isaac is expecting to escort you." Pearl nearly dropped the dough she was shaping. "He said that." "Not in so many words," the housekeeper admitted with a sly smile. "But he ordered the buggy cleaned and polished, and I heard him tell Billy to make sure his good suit was pressed. He hasn't bothered with the spring dance in years." Pearl tried to suppress the flutter of excitement in her chest. "Perhaps he's going for business reasons. Many of the ranchers will be there." "Perhaps," Mrs. Abernathy agreed, not sounding convinced. "Either way, you'll need a nice dress." "What about that green fabric you bought? Have you done anything with it yet?" "No, I've been too busy." "Well then, we'd better get started. The dance is only a week away." The next few days passed in a flurry of preparations. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a skilled seamstress, helping Pearl create a dress that was modest enough for a country dance, but flattering to her slender figure. The green fabric brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, and the simple design was elevated by Mrs. Abernathy's suggestion of delicate white lace at the collar and cuffs. Isaac said nothing directly about the dance until the morning of the event, when he caught Pearl alone in the kitchen. "I was hoping you'd accompany me to the spring dance tonight," he said without preamble. "If you'd like to, that is." Despite Mrs. Abernathy's hints, the direct invitation still caught Pearl by surprise. "I'd be honored," she replied, a blush warming her cheeks. "Good." Isaac smiled, looking pleased and perhaps a bit relieved. "We'll leave around 6, if that suits you." Pearl spent the afternoon in a state of nervous anticipation, taking extra care with her appearance. Mrs. Abernathy helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face and the rest pinned up in a neat chignon. The green dress fit perfectly, and when Pearl looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized the confident young woman who looked back at her. Isaac was waiting at the foot of the stairs when she descended, dressed in a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He stared at her for a long moment before remembering his manners. "You look beautiful, Pearl," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, accepting his offered arm. "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Abernathy watched them from the doorway of the kitchen, a satisfied smile on her face. "Don't stay out too late, you two. And Isaac, remember she works for Dr. Miller tomorrow." "Yes, madam," Isaac replied with mock solemnity, leading Pearl out to the waiting buggy. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns hung from the rafters, wildflowers arranged in mason jars on every available surface, and a small stage set up for the musicians: a fiddler, a banjo player, and a man with a concertina. Nearly everyone from town and the surrounding ranches seemed to be in attendance, the room buzzing with conversation and laughter. Pearl felt eyes on them as they entered, and she heard the whispers that followed their progress through the crowd. Isaac, seemingly oblivious or perhaps just unconcerned, kept her hand tucked firmly in the crook of his arm as he greeted acquaintances and introduced her to those she hadn't yet met. "Isaac Montgomery, as I live and breathe," called a booming voice. A large man with an impressive mustache approached, clapping Isaac on the shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you here this year. Judge Parker," Isaac greeted him warmly. "Allow me to introduce Miss Pearl Winters. Pearl, this is Judge William Parker, an old friend of my father's." "Miss Winters," the judge said, taking her hand. "I've heard good things about you from Doc Miller. Says you have a natural gift for medicine." "The doctor is too kind," Pearl replied. "I still have much to learn. Modest, too," Judge Parker observed with a wink at Isaac. "You'd better stake your claim quickly, Isaac, before some other fellow realizes what a treasure you've found." Isaac coughed uncomfortably, but before he could respond, the musicians struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving toward the center of the room. "Would you care to dance?" Isaac asked, offering his hand to Pearl. She accepted gratefully, eager to escape the judge's knowing gaze. Isaac led her onto the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while holding her other hand in his. "I should warn you," Pearl said as they began to move with the music. "I haven't danced in years." "You're doing fine," Isaac assured her, guiding her confidently through the steps. "Just follow my lead." Pearl relaxed into the dance, surprised at how natural it felt to be in Isaac's arms. He was an excellent dancer, moving with a grace that belied his usual practical demeanor. As they circled the floor, Pearl caught glimpses of familiar and unfamiliar faces: Dr. Miller nodding approvingly, Mrs. Jenkins from the general store smiling widely, and Pamela Wilson watching with thinly veiled displeasure. "Everyone is staring at us," Pearl murmured. "Let them," Isaac replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm only concerned with one person's opinion tonight." The simple statement made Pearl's heart skip a beat. Before she could respond, the music ended, and couples around them applauded the musicians. Isaac reluctantly released her, but stayed close as they moved to the refreshment table. The evening progressed pleasantly, with more dances, conversations with various townspeople, and a delicious supper provided by the ladies' auxiliary. Pearl found herself enjoying the social occasion more than she'd expected, largely due to Isaac's attentive presence at her side. As the night wore on, the musicians began playing slower, more romantic tunes. When Isaac led Pearl onto the floor for one such dance, he held her closer than before, still perfectly proper, but with an intimacy that sent her pulse racing. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked softly. "Very much," Pearl admitted. "Though I'm still not used to being the center of attention." "Is that what we are? You must know that people are talking about us, wondering." "Wondering what?" Pearl took a deep breath. "Wondering about the nature of our relationship, whether it's still merely employer and employee." Isaac's steps faltered slightly before he recovered. "And what would you tell them if asked directly?" "I don't know," Pearl confessed. "What would you say?" Instead of answering immediately, Isaac guided her toward the doors that opened onto a small porch, away from the crowded dance floor. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of spring blossoms. Music drifted out from the hall, muted now by distance. "I would say," Isaac began carefully, "that I have the greatest respect for you as a member of my household and as a medical practitioner. That I value your intelligence, your courage, and your compassion." Pearl's heart sank a little at the formal tone of his words. "That's very kind of you." "I'm not finished," Isaac said, taking both her hands in his. "I would also say that over these past months, my feelings have grown into something far beyond respect and admiration. That I find myself thinking about you when we're apart and watching for you when we're together. That the best part of my day is when we talk in the evenings, and that I've never felt this way about anyone before." Pearl stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Isaac, I know it's too soon," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "You came to Timber Creek looking for independence, not entanglement. And I promised myself I wouldn't pressure you, wouldn't take advantage of your position in my household. But tonight, seeing you like this, I couldn't keep silent any longer." "I don't want you to keep silent," Pearl whispered, squeezing his hands. "I've been afraid to acknowledge my own feelings, afraid of misreading your kindness as something more, afraid of wanting something that seemed impossible." "And what is it you want, Pearl Winters?" Isaac asked, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "You," she said simply. "Just you." Isaac released her hands only to frame her face gently between his palms. "May I kiss you, Pearl?" She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Isaac lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Pearl rose up on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a tender, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Pearl's arms wound around his neck and Isaac pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since that day in the line shack," he admitted. Pearl smiled. "So have I." They might have stayed there longer, lost in their newfound understanding, but the music inside changed to a livelier tune, and the doors to the porch suddenly burst open as a laughing couple stumbled out. "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt," the man said, quickly pulling his companion back inside. Pearl buried her face against Isaac's shoulder, half embarrassed and half amused. "And now the gossip will be even more intense. Let's give them something worth talking about, then," Isaac suggested with a mischievous smile rarely seen on his serious face. He offered her his arm. "Shall we return to the dance, Miss Winters?" Pearl took his arm, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Montgomery." They danced every remaining dance together, oblivious to the knowing smiles and whispered comments around them. When the last song ended and it was time to leave, Isaac helped Pearl into the buggy with a tenderness that spoke volumes. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing the significant shift in their relationship. Under the canopy of stars, with the gentle rhythm of the horses' hooves on the road, Pearl felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way that had nothing to do with the physical destination. "What happens now?" she asked as the ranch house came into view. Isaac took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "That depends on what you want, Pearl. I won't rush you, and nothing has to change in our arrangements if you're not ready. And if I am ready? For things to change, I mean." Isaac pulled the buggy to a stop in front of the house. "Then I would very much like to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife if you'll have me." Pearl's breath caught at the directness of his statement. "I think I would like that very much." Isaac's smile was visible even in the darkness. "Then that's what we'll do." He helped her down from the buggy, but before they reached the front door, he pulled her gently into his arms for another kiss longer and more assured than their first. "Good night, Pearl," he whispered against her lips. "Good night, Isaac," she replied, reluctantly stepping away. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Pearl felt as though she were floating. Just months ago, she had been sleeping on the porch of a saloon, desperate and alone. Now she had work she loved, a place she belonged, and a man who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. For the first time in her life, Pearl Winters allowed herself to believe in a future filled with happiness. The weeks following the spring dance were among the happiest of Pearl's life. Isaac courted her with a blend of old-fashioned formality and genuine affection that both amused and touched her. There were bouquets of wildflowers waiting for her when she returned from town, rides to scenic spots on the ranch property, and quiet evenings on the porch swing talking about everything and nothing. Mrs. Abernathy watched their courtship with undisguised approval, though she maintained a token semblance of propriety by ensuring they were never alone in the house together for too long. The ranch hands adopted a protective attitude toward Pearl, tipping their hats respectfully whenever she passed, and finding excuses to be nearby when she ventured out alone. In town, reactions were mixed. Dr. Miller was delighted, having developed a fatherly affection for Pearl and a deep respect for Isaac. Most of the townspeople seemed to find the romance charming, the successful rancher and the brave young woman he'd rescued from the saloon porch. There were exceptions, of course. Pamela Wilson and her father maintained a cool distance, and Pearl occasionally caught disapproving glances from some of the more socially conscious matrons. None of that mattered to Pearl, who found herself falling more deeply in love with Isaac with each passing day. She discovered new facets of his character, his dry sense of humor, his passionate interest in agricultural innovations, his unexpected talent for sketching landscapes. In turn, she gradually shared more of herself with him, her dreams of someday opening a small clinic for women and children, her secret enjoyment of penny dreadfuls, her bittersweet memories of her parents. By mid-June, their courtship had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Pearl continued her work with Dr. Miller and her duties at the ranch, while Isaac managed his business affairs and the increasing demands of the summer season. They stole moments together when they could, each encounter deepening their connection. On a particularly beautiful Sunday afternoon, Isaac suggested a picnic by the small lake on the eastern edge of his property. It was one of Pearl's favorite spots, peaceful and secluded, with willows trailing their branches in the clear water and wildflowers dotting the surrounding meadow. Mrs. Abernathy packed them an elaborate lunch, exchanging a meaningful glance with Isaac that Pearl pretended not to notice. They rode out together, Pearl now comfortable enough on horseback to manage even the more challenging trails that led to the lake. Isaac spread a blanket beneath a large willow and unpacked the food while Pearl gathered a small bouquet of wildflowers. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and sage. As they ate, they talked about Isaac's plans to purchase adjacent land to expand the ranch and Pearl's growing responsibilities at Dr. Miller's practice. It was easy, comfortable conversation, yet Pearl sensed an underlying tension in Isaac, a nervous energy she wasn't accustomed to seeing in him. After they finished eating, Isaac suggested a walk along the lakeshore. Hand in hand, they strolled in companionable silence until they reached a small peninsula that jutted into the water, offering a panoramic view of the mountains beyond. "My father proposed to my mother in this exact spot," Isaac said suddenly. "He brought her here a week after they met. Said he knew from the first moment he saw her that she was the one he wanted to spend his life with." Pearl's heart began to race as Isaac turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "My father was a wise man," he continued, his voice husky with emotion. "Because I felt the same way the night I found you on that saloon porch. Even half frozen and defensive, there was something about you that called to me. Every day since then has only confirmed what I knew in my heart from the beginning." Isaac dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Pearl Winters, I love you more than I ever thought possible. You've brought light and laughter back into my life and into this ranch. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Pearl's eyes as joy bubbled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Isaac Montgomery, I will marry you." Isaac stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally separated, he reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he explained, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. "My father gave it to me before he died. Said I should save it for the woman who captured my heart the way my mother captured his." Pearl extended her trembling left hand, and Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring the way the sunlight caught in the diamond's facets. "I'll treasure it always. When would you like to be married?" Isaac asked, his arms still around her waist. "I'd say tomorrow if I thought Judge Parker would agree to it." Pearl laughed. "Perhaps not quite that soon, but I don't want a long engagement either." "August," Isaac suggested. "After the summer roundup, but before harvest gets too busy? That would give us time to prepare properly." "August sounds perfect," Pearl agreed, then added shyly, "I don't want anything elaborate, just our friends and the people who've become like family to us." "Whatever you want," Isaac promised, though Mrs. Abernathy may have other ideas. "She's been planning this wedding since the day you fixed my shoulder." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the lake, making plans for their future together. Isaac spoke of additions he wanted to make to the house, a proper office for Pearl, where she could see patients if she wished, a larger kitchen that Mrs. Abernathy had been requesting for years, perhaps even a nursery someday. Pearl listened, her head on his shoulder, occasionally offering suggestions, or asking questions. The future stretching before them seemed bright with promise, and for a young woman who had once had nothing but a locket and the clothes on her back, it was almost overwhelming. "Are you happy, truly?" Isaac asked as they packed up the remains of their picnic late in the afternoon. Pearl looked at him, this man who had changed her life in ways she was still discovering. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Timber Creek, and the surrounding ranches. Congratulations poured in, along with a few raised eyebrows at the relatively short courtship. Mrs. Abernathy, as Isaac had predicted, took charge of wedding preparations with enthusiastic efficiency, consulting Pearl on major decisions but handling most of the details herself. Dr. Miller insisted on hosting an engagement dinner for them at the hotel restaurant, inviting several prominent citizens and making a toast that brought tears to Pearl's eyes. "To Isaac and Pearl," the elderly doctor said, raising his glass. "Two of the finest people I've had the privilege to know. May your life together be long and filled with the same compassion and integrity you've shown individually." The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. There was a wedding dress to be made, invitations to be sent, arrangements to be confirmed with the pastor of Timber Creek's small church. Through it all, Pearl continued her work with Dr. Miller and her duties at the ranch, though Isaac insisted she delegate more to Mrs. Abernathy as the wedding approached. "You're going to be the mistress of this house soon enough," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch. "You should start getting used to giving the orders instead of taking them." Pearl wrinkled her nose. "I'm not sure I'll ever be comfortable giving orders to Mrs. Abernathy. She knows this house better than I ever will." "She'll help you," Isaac assured her. "She's as excited about this wedding as we are." Maybe more so. July brought scorching heat and increased activity on the ranch as the summer roundup began. Isaac was often gone from dawn until dusk, coming home exhausted but always finding energy for at least a short time with Pearl before retiring. One evening in late July, about 2 weeks before the wedding, Pearl was sitting on the porch waiting for Isaac to return when she saw a ranch hand riding hard toward the house, his horse lathered with sweat. "Miss Winters," the young man called as he dismounted. "Is Doc Miller here?" "No, Billy, what's happened?" Pearl asked, already moving toward the house to retrieve her medical bag. "It's the boss," Billy explained, his face pale beneath his tan. "Got thrown from his horse out by the north boundary. Hit his head on a rock. He's conscious but bleeding something fierce, and his arm don't look right." Pearl's heart clenched with fear, but her medical training took over. "Where is he now?" "The men are bringing him in a wagon. Should be here within the hour." I rode ahead to fetch the doc. "I'll go for Dr. Miller," Mrs. Abernathy said, appearing in the doorway. "You get everything ready here, Pearl." Pearl nodded gratefully. "Have them bring him straight to his bedroom when they arrive. And Billy, ride back and tell them not to give him any whiskey for the pain, no matter how much he asks." As Billy galloped off, Pearl moved with focused efficiency, gathering supplies and preparing Isaac's room. She heated water, collected clean linens, and laid out her instruments with steady hands despite the fear churning in her stomach. When the wagon finally arrived, Pearl was waiting. Isaac was conscious but groggy, his face ashen beneath a layer of dust and blood from a nasty gash on his forehead. His right arm was clearly broken, swollen and lying at an unnatural angle across his chest. "Pearl," he murmured as the men carried him carefully up the stairs. "Didn't mean to cause such a fuss." "Hush now," she said, keeping her voice calm despite her inner turmoil. "Let's get you cleaned up before Dr. Miller arrives." With the help of 2 ranch hands, she got Isaac settled on his bed. She cut away his shirt to better assess his injuries: the broken arm, the head wound, and various cuts and bruises from the fall. "Everyone out," she ordered the hovering ranch hands. "Except you, Jim. I need another pair of hands." As the others reluctantly departed, Pearl began cleaning the head wound, which looked worse than it was, as scalp injuries tended to bleed profusely. Isaac winced, but remained still under her ministrations. "How bad is it really?" he asked, his eyes clearer now as shock began to wear off. "The head wound is superficial," Pearl told him honestly. "But I'm concerned about concussion. The arm is definitely broken, a clean break from what I can tell, but it needs to be set properly." "Do it," Isaac said through gritted teeth. "Before Miller gets here." Pearl hesitated. "Isaac, I've assisted with setting bones. But I trust you, he interrupted. And it hurts like the devil. Pearl looked at Jim, who nodded his readiness to help. Very well. But this will hurt more before it feels better. She worked quickly, using techniques she'd learned from her father and refined under Dr. Miller's tutelage. Isaac made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath as she manipulated the broken bone back into alignment, though sweat beaded on his forehead and his left hand gripped the bedsheet until his knuckles turned white. By the time Dr. Miller arrived with Mrs. Abernathy, Pearl had cleaned and bandaged the head wound and fashioned a temporary splint for the broken arm. The doctor examined her work with approval before conducting his own assessment of Isaac's condition. Excellent job, Miss Winters, he said finally. Couldn't have done better myself. The arm is set perfectly and should heal well, though he'll need to keep it immobilized for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Isaac protested weakly. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Dr. Miller chuckled. Well, you'll be a one-armed bridegroom then. Nothing to be done about that. As for the head injury, it's not serious, but you'll need to rest for a few days. No riding, no exertion. Isaac started to object, but Pearl laid a gentle hand on his uninjured arm. Please, Isaac, do as Dr. Miller says. He subsided with a sigh. Fine, but I'm not postponing this wedding, broken arm or not. Never suggested you should, the doctor replied with a wink at Pearl. Now, I've left some powders for pain. 1 every 4 hours as needed, mixed with water. Keep him quiet for the next few days, and send for me if he develops fever, severe headache, or confusion. After Dr. Miller left, Mrs. Abernathy shooed everyone else out of the room, insisting that Isaac needed rest. Pearl was the last to leave, lingering by his bedside. You scared me, she admitted softly. Isaac caught her hand with his good one. I'm sorry. Stupid mistake, wasn't paying attention to where Thunder was putting his feet. Too busy thinking about wedding details. Pearl smiled despite her worry. Well, next time think about wedding details when you're not on horseback. Yes, madam. Isaac agreed with a weak smile of his own. Pearl. Yes. Stay with me? Just until I fall asleep? She should have refused. Propriety demanded it. But the vulnerability in his eyes and the knowledge of how close she had come to losing him made Pearl reckless. She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still holding his hand. Just until you fall asleep, she agreed. Isaac's eyes drifted closed, the pain powders beginning to take effect. Love you, he murmured sleepily. I love you too, Pearl whispered, watching over him until his breathing deepened into sleep. The days leading up to the wedding were not what Pearl had imagined. Instead of last-minute preparations and nervous anticipation, she divided her time between caring for Isaac and finalizing wedding arrangements with Mrs. Abernathy's help. Isaac chafed at the restrictions of his injury but followed doctor's orders, motivated by his determination to be as recovered as possible for their wedding day. Despite the unexpected challenges, or perhaps because of them, Pearl found her love for Isaac deepening. She saw new sides of him, his impatience with his own weakness, his genuine appreciation for her care, his concern for the ranch hands who were working doubly hard in his absence. In turn, Isaac watched Pearl manage both his care and the wedding preparations with growing admiration. You're remarkable, you know that, he said one afternoon as she changed the bandage on his head. Most women would have postponed the wedding or at least complained about the added burden. Pearl smiled. What would be the point of complaining? Besides, this is good practice for that in sickness and in health, part of our vows. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect August day with a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Pearl woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent a quiet hour watching the sunrise from her bedroom window, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this day. Mrs. Abernathy arrived with a breakfast tray and a motherly smile. Big day, my girl. Are you ready? More than ready, Pearl assured her, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Pearl bathed with scented soap that had been a gift from Dr. Miller's wife, arranged her hair with Mrs. Abernathy's help, and finally donned the wedding dress they had worked on together, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace accents. Oh, Pearl, Mrs. Abernathy breathed when she was fully dressed. You look absolutely beautiful. Pearl turned to the mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant young woman who looked back at her. The dress complemented her slender figure perfectly, and her auburn hair, arranged in soft curls with small white flowers tucked into it, glowed in the sunlight streaming through the window. "I wish my parents could see me," she said softly. Mrs. Abernathy squeezed her hand. "They would be so proud of you, dear." "As am I." A knock at the door heralded the arrival of Dr. Miller, who had offered to give Pearl away in the absence of any family. "Are you ready, my dear?" he asked, his eyes suspiciously bright as he took in her appearance. "Isaac is waiting, and if we delay much longer, I fear he might storm up here to fetch you himself, broken arm and all." Pearl laughed, her nerves settling at the thought of Isaac's impatience. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." The ceremony was held in the garden behind the ranch house, beneath an arch of wildflowers and greenery that the ranch hands had constructed under Mrs. Abernathy's direction. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows, now filled with friends and neighbors from town and surrounding ranches. A small string ensemble from Denver, hired as a surprise by Isaac, played softly as Pearl made her way down the improvised aisle on Dr. Miller's arm. Isaac stood waiting for her, handsome in a new black suit despite the sling supporting his injured arm. His face as he watched her approach was a study in wonder and love, and Pearl felt answering emotions swell in her own heart. The pastor's words washed over her as she and Isaac stood hand in hand beneath the flower-bedecked arch. She spoke her vows clearly, meaning every word, and felt a thrill as Isaac promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of his life. When the pastor finally pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. Pearl blushed, but couldn't stop smiling as they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. Isaac Montgomery. The celebration that followed was joyous, a feast prepared under Mrs. Abernathy's supervision, music and dancing on a wooden platform constructed specially for the occasion, and enough cake and champagne to satisfy even the most demanding guest. Pearl moved through it all in a happy daze, her hand rarely leaving Isaac's as they accepted congratulations and well wishes. As evening approached, the guests began to depart, many of them having long rides back to their own ranches. Dr. Miller was among the last to leave, embracing Pearl warmly. "I couldn't be prouder if you were my own daughter," he told her, his voice gruff with emotion. "You found a good man in Isaac." "I know," Pearl agreed, looking across the garden to where her husband, was thanking the musicians for their performance. "I'm very blessed." Mrs. Abernathy had arranged for them to have the house to themselves for 3 days, tactfully taking herself off to visit her daughter in Denver. The ranch hands had been equally discreet, finding reasons to be occupied with distant parts of the property. As twilight deepened into night, Pearl and Isaac found themselves alone at last, standing on the porch of what was now truly their home. "Happy, Mrs. Montgomery?" Isaac asked, drawing her close with his good arm. "Completely," Pearl assured him, resting her head against his chest. "And you?" "More than I can express." He kissed the top of her head. "When I found you on that saloon porch, I never imagined this moment. Never imagined I could be this fortunate." Pearl looked up at him, her heart full. "We've both been fortunate. To find each other, to find home." Isaac's kiss was a promise and a beginning, as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky above Montgomery Ranch. Epilogue: 2 years later, Pearl Montgomery stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as riders approached from the eastern pasture. Even at a distance, she could pick out Isaac's tall figure leading the group, straight and proud in the saddle. The autumn sun caught in his dark hair, now touched with a few strands of silver at the temples that Pearl found inexplicably attractive. "Papa's home," announced 4-year-old Daniel, who had been playing with wooden blocks at Pearl's feet. He had come to them shortly after their wedding, an orphan child of one of the miners, left parentless after a cave-in. Isaac and Pearl had taken him in temporarily while arrangements were made for his care, but it had taken only days for both of them to realize they couldn't bear to part with the solemn little boy. The adoption had been finalized 6 months later, making their family complete. Or so they had thought, until 3 months ago when Pearl had shared the joyful news that they would be welcoming another child in the spring. "Yes, sweetheart, Papa's home," Pearl agreed, placing a protective hand over the slight swell of her stomach. "Shall we go meet him?" Daniel needed no encouragement, racing down the porch steps with the boundless energy of childhood. Pearl followed more sedately, one hand supporting her lower back, where pregnancy was already causing some discomfort. Isaac dismounted smoothly and swept Daniel up into his arms, listening intently to the boy's excited account of his day. His eyes, however, were on Pearl as she approached, filled with the same love and wonder she'd seen in them on their wedding day. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked, setting Daniel down to greet Pearl with a gentle kiss. "Three," Pearl corrected, guiding his hand to her stomach. "And we're all doing splendidly. How was the roundup?" "Successful. We're ready for the cattle drive next week." Isaac kept his arm around her waist as they walked back to the house together, Daniel running ahead with one of the ranch dogs. "And you'll be careful," Pearl said. It wasn't a question. Isaac smiled down at her. "Always. I have too much to come home to." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with evidence of the life they'd built together. Pearl's medical books shared shelf space with Isaac's agricultural journals. Daniel's toys were scattered across the parlor floor. The dining table was set for supper, with an extra place for Mrs. Abernathy, who now lived in a small cottage on the property, but still insisted on helping with meals when Isaac returned from long days on the range. Their life wasn't perfect. There had been challenges and disappointments along with the joys. The previous winter had been harsh, claiming some of their cattle despite their best efforts. There had been disagreements between them, adjustments as they learned to balance their individual strengths and accommodate each other's weaknesses. Pearl's clinic for women and children, opened in town the previous year, demanded much of her time and energy, while Isaac's responsibilities to the ranch sometimes kept him away for days at a time. But through it all, they had faced life's challenges together, their love deepening with each passing season. Pearl never forgot how close she had come to freezing to death that January night. How different her life might have been if Isaac hadn't found her sleeping on the porch of the Silver Dollar Saloon. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, noticing her thoughtful expression as they stood together in the doorway, watching Daniel arrange his blocks into elaborate patterns on the parlor floor. "The night we met," Pearl admitted. "How everything changed because you decided to bring me home with you." Isaac smiled, pulling her closer. "Best decision I ever made." Pearl turned in his arms to face him. "No regrets? Even with all the complications I've brought into your life?" "Not one," Isaac assured her, his voice husky with emotion. "You are the greatest blessing of my life, Pearl Montgomery. You and Daniel, and this little one on the way." He placed his hand gently over her stomach. "I thank God every day for leading me to that saloon porch." Pearl stood on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "So do I, my love. So do I." As twilight settled over Montgomery Ranch, the family gathered around the dinner table. Isaac, Pearl, Daniel, and Mrs. Abernathy. There was laughter and conversation, plans for the future, and appreciation for the present. And if anyone had looked through the window at that moment, they would have seen not the desperate young woman who once had nowhere to go, nor the lonely rancher who had buried his heart after his parents' deaths, but a family bound together by love, choice, and the remarkable journey that had brought them home to each other.